If you ever feel like you're being extorted by your software vendor, it's probably because you are. That's what I'm going to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And when we're helping clients define their digital strategies and ultimately implement whatever technology or technologies they've selected, we find that there's a lot of gamesmanship that's played by software vendors. And software vendors are really the masters of extorting their customers and forcing customers to do things that they may or may not want to do or that may or may not be best for their business. Now, of course, we're all out to make a profit motive, including software vendors, but there's a fine line between profit motive and profit motive at the expense of putting your business at risk. So what I want to do today is chat through and talk through some of the things that are signs of potential vendor extortion, as well as at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about some mitigation strategies you can put in place to ensure that you're in control of the project and not your software vendors.
So that's a clip from my YouTube video. You can find the full video on my YouTube channel. And it's a clip where I talk about how the enterprise technology and ERP software industry is a lot like the mafia. It's a lot like organized crime. It's something that I've struggled with throughout my career, something that has made me love and hate this industry all at the same time, but I love it just enough to stay in it and be excited about trying to do something about it. And one of the things I've done is I've written a book about it called Welcome to the Machine. It's out on May 1st. You can find it on Amazon. You can pre-order it now for a discount. You can get the physical copy, hard copy, or soft copy, soft paper or paperback copy or hardcover copy. You can get that shipped to you anywhere in the world beginning May 1st. But that's what we're going to get into today, episode 270 of Transformation Ground Control. We're going to talk about this industry. We're going to talk about the nuances of the industry, just the things you need to be aware of to make yourself successful against this backdrop, this challenging backdrop, but it's not impossible. That's the good news. This is episode 270 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Welcome to episode 270 of Transformation Ground Control. And today's episode, we're going to talk about the enterprise technology industry, how it's built, how it's structured, how people are incentivized, and how customers, through their own dysfunction, their own internal dysfunction, oftentimes get sucked up by the machine. And this is actually the root cause of what leads to so many digital transformation and ERP project failures. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, an independent tech agnostic consulting provider, and also the sponsor of this podcast. I'm your host here today and excited to get into today's discussion because we're going to unpack something that has been on my mind that I've really struggled with throughout my whole career, and that is the nature of this industry. Now, I poked some fun at the industry at times. Some get a bit uncomfortable when I do, but I'm fairly vocal, and I've become more vocal as I get older and more established in the industry. But one of the things I talk about in my new book, which is called Welcome to the Machine, one of the things I talk about is how the enterprise technology industry operates on the same organizing principles as organized crime. And that's a strong statement. It's a bold statement. Many might be offended by that. Many might be shocked that how dare I compare this industry to the mafia or to organized crime? Now, to be fair and to be clear, I'm not suggesting that anything the industry is doing is criminal. In most cases, it's not criminal, even when there is legal action taken. Those are more exceptions than the norm. There's plenty of failures and lawsuits in this space, but for the most part, most organizations have more moderate and more well-intentioned failures, we'll call it. They're still failures. There's still problems. They still happen. The odds are still stacked against you. But what I'm going to submit to you today and through this conversation of unpacking my book is that it is very well orchestrated. This industry is well oiled. It's a well-oiled machine, and it's designed to sell as much software as possible. And that on the surface, you think, okay, big deal. Every industry is designed to sell more. Every company that's for profit is out there to make a profit. I'm not suggesting that capitalism is bad or the tech industry should not be selling software to their full advantage. But what I am saying is that the industry and the way it's evolved and the way it's built does not favor customers. In fact, in many, if not most cases, customers are the least important part of the equation. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that today, not because I think that's true, but because the way the industry is built, is more focused on vendors and technology. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's so much money. And this is something that's becoming more and more apparent. And I think this statement is becoming more true, that the industry is becoming more, I don't want to say necessarily unethical, although there's some unethical things that happen in this industry. But I do think, given the magnitude of money chasing cloud annual recurring revenue and the amount of money chasing AI investments, it has just become so irrational that there's just too much money. And it's too much money at stake here to where customers become the least important part of the equation. Because if I'm an executive and I'm hyper-focused on getting customers to move to the cloud, whether that's the right thing for them or not, and I'm going to be heavily compensated for that. And by the way, I'm not heavily compensated for customer outcomes. I'm heavily compensated for selling you cloud technology. When I say I do not sell software, to be clear. I'm saying if I were a sales rep working for a software vendor or even a system integrator. And so for that reason, that's why I make this analogy or this comparison to organized crime. The vendor is the Don collecting tribute and setting the terms. The system integrators are the capos, and the consulting and analyst firms are the consigliere, and the client is the mark. So, it's a bit strong. I do admit, I'll be the first to admit that there's a bit of hyperbole here in this comment. But if you really stop to think about it, and when you read this book, I think, and I hope, you'll start to see that maybe there is some truth to this quote here, to this statement, that perhaps there are mafia-esque or organized crime-esque sorts of behaviors that are happening in the space. And again, to be clear, and this is more for our expert witness practice and potential expert witness clients, I am not suggesting that there's illegal behavior in this industry. I have seen illegal behavior. I've seen plenty of it. I've seen even more unethical behavior. But for the most part, I don't think it's an unethical industry by intent. It's by design. It's the way the industry was built. And I don't think it was intended to put customers at the bottom of the totem pole. But in my opinion, that is what has happened here. And I'm explaining what I mean by that all here today. Now, before I dive into the inner workings of the machine, which is going to be the real focus here in today's conversation, I'm going to take three themes or three pieces of the machine that I unpack in the book, Welcome to the Machine. And in that book, I talk about the three major gears or the three major components of the machine. And then each segment of the machine has a part. So there's several chapters devoted or focused on each of the pieces of the machine. So I do talk a lot about that. I also talk a lot about a lot of case studies related to failures and how the machine contributed to the failures. These are systemic flaws and breakdowns. And, just to give you some flavor of what some of the symptoms are, some of the smoke, some of the signals that suggest the machine is broken. And when I say the machine is broken, it's actually not broken. It's actually working really, really well for software vendors. But when I say it's broken for customers. The customers usually get the raw end of the deal. If anyone's guaranteed to succeed in this machine, it is the clients, it's the consultants, and it's the industry analyst. And I put consultants, system integrators, industry analysts, I put them all in one bucket. It's more the ecosystem that supports the software vendors. That's the third part of the machine. And don't get me wrong, it also has plenty to do with client dysfunction, their own blind spots, their own organizational weaknesses, their cultural deficiencies. They fall victim to the machine because of their deficiency. So I'm not saying customers and clients are not to blame. They have plenty of issues on their own, but the machine is designed to take advantage of those vulnerabilities and weak spots. And you don't have to look any further than the results of this industry. I mean, this is an infographic I shared a few days ago on LinkedIn, and I encourage you to follow me there if you don't already. And I try to put out good content like this just to give some case studies, good and bad, and the ugly. But in this case, you can see that most failure rate estimates are somewhere in the 55 to 75% range. Many put it above 80% for digital transformation failure rates. How you define failure is another topic for another day and another discussion point that we can get to. But these are some of the big challenges. And when you look at AI failure rates for new AI initiatives, there's some data coming out suggesting that AI failure rates are even higher than this. So despite the advancements in technology over the last 30 years I've been doing this, things have not gotten better. In fact, I would argue they've gotten worse, and they're going to continue getting worse for a number of reasons that we'll talk about here today. And in general, organizations going through change have about a 70% failure rate, whether it's technological change, business change, or all the above. Like I said, AI has an 80% plus failure rate. And then I've listed a few examples of failures, and I talk about all these failures in the book. And I talk about the failures in the context of how the way the machine is built and how the systemic breakdowns in the machine created some of these failures. And again, as you read these case studies against that backdrop, you'll see that all three gears of the machine have to be fully functioning in order for it to contribute to the failure. Now, fortunately for software vendors and consultants, and unfortunately for customers, most of the time the machine works as intended. You see these big, massive failures, and you look at Nike spending $100 million on a project. Lidl just went through a half a billion euro implementation and had an unworkable system for some time before they could stabilize and get it working again. Target Canada actually shut down their entire operations. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs, largely as a result of a massively failed ERP implementation. I talk a lot about that case study in the book, throughout the book. Revlon had a big failure, US Air Force, et cetera. And you look at Queensland Health out of Australia, they had 80,000 people that weren't getting paid properly. In some cases, weren't getting paid at all, were getting paid late, were getting paid too little, and that's a really big deal. When you have people that living paycheck to paycheck and your ERP system causes a failure, it's not just an internal failure. You're affecting a lot of people in their pocketbooks. So these failures are big deals. And again, I talk about this in the new book, all these case studies. But again, these are systemic breakdowns. I know over the years, I myself and others have spent a lot of time talking about what's that root cause of failure. Is it because technology sucks? Is it because software vendors aren't good at what they do? Is it because poor project management, poor program management, whatever the case may be? And those things are all true. But the more I analyze and the more I see in this industry, the more I realize that is how the machine is built. In those failure case studies I just gave you, in most cases, the vendors and the system integrators all benefited from the failures. They all came out ahead. But those organizations that experienced the failure were absolutely on the short end of the stick. And that's the problem with the industry here today. And, this is something where, over time, I start to get the feeling that maybe I've covered all the failures that are out there. I've covered all the major failures. I've done tons of videos about it, tons of case studies, tons of newsletter articles, just unpacking and understanding why these projects fail. But then something new comes along, and I find that there's so many failures out there that are public record in many cases, even more, tons more, exponentially more failures that you don't hear about because they aren't large established organizations. And that's where things become interesting, is because you see just how often that happens. Now, this is a video that Shane Kennedy on LinkedIn posted. I hope he doesn't mind me stealing his content here. To be fair, I did put in the comments here. Thank you for sharing, Shane. I wasn't familiar with this case study. I may have to steal your idea to cover it. Do you have the same video on Instagram or TikTok I could stitch a remix with? But I kind of preempted him in the spirit of getting him in or getting him some airtime here as quick as possible, because I really like this video. Real simple case study. I actually didn't know who this person was, but I started following him. In fact, I have not followed him. I'm going to do it right now, real time in front of you. Follow Shane if you get a chance. But here's a case study that he identifies out of Australia, which I believe is where he's from as well. So this is about a 1-minute clip. Let's take a look at this.
The Australian government spent $341 million on an ERP program that delivered nothing to production, not a single capability. And the lessons are ones every organization needs to hear. GovERP was an ambitious attempt to standardize ERP systems across more than 100 federal agencies onto a single SAP S/4HANA platform. Finance Minister Katie Gallagher called it, and this is a direct quote, an abject, eye-wateringly expensive failure. The independent review panel that published the GovERP Reuse Assessment Report agreed. 5 years, $341 million, zero production outcomes. According to this great article from Innovation Oz, 3 things killed it. First, naive centralization. Forcing 100 agencies with completely different mandates onto one platform was never realistic. Second, a single vendor was locked in without competitive procurement before anyone understood what agencies actually needed. And third, ownership changed hands mid-program and accountability evaporated with it. These aren't unique government problems. They happen in the private sector every single day. Now, the panel's advice here was clear. Smaller scope, shorter timeframes, agency-level ownership, and competitive procurement from day one. The SAP ECC support deadline is still December 2027. Now, every agency that was waiting on GovERP is now on their own, and the clock is ticking. So what do you think is the single biggest lesson from GovERP and future ERP programs in government or the private sector? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments.
So be sure to follow Shane and drop your thoughts in the comments there. But this is a really good video. I really like this video. It's first of all, the production value is very high. He's a very good presenter, and I like how he just broke this down in a really basic, simple way. And this case study, and the way in particular he analyzes this case study, points to a lot of the conflicts in the machine, this whole idea of the machine. So he talks about how the first root cause of failure was their desire and their intent to move to a centralized, standard, single operating model, single set of tools with SAP. And that sounds good in theory, and even technologists that work for end customers a lot of times like that idea because it sounds so much easier in theory to have one system rather than a bunch of disparate siloed systems. But you look at what vendors do, they are highly, highly incentivized to get as many of you as possible onto their vanilla generic cloud ERP solution, because that's the way they scale. That's the way they maximize their profit. And that's the way, more importantly, they get that annual recurring revenue, that ARR, which is the most important metric that software vendors are rewarded on. And they will do anything they can to get that number up. And if that means that the GovERP program in Australia or any other organization throughout the world might suffer and might experience severe disruption, again, that's not the primary purpose of the machine. The machine is designed to get as many of you as possible onto cloud software, ideally public cloud that's not at all customized. It's just using clean core vanilla systems off the shelf. Now, again, I know a lot of you listening are going to say, well, Eric, how else would you implement an ERP system? Why wouldn't you go vanilla, go clean core, go one single system? Again, it sounds really good in theory, but the bigger you are, the more complex you are, and the more unique you are in your industry, the more difficult it's going to be. And again, that's not the concern of software vendors because they are not measured on it. They're not rewarded for it. The entire ecosystem supporting software vendors is not concerned about that either because they are not rewarded for it either. Consultants are paid by vendors. In many cases, consultants make more money. And I know a lot of software vendors or software consulting firms that specialize in SAP or Oracle and Microsoft. I know many of them, if not, I don't know if it's most, but it's a lot of them make more money from software vendors than they do from their end customers. And stop and think about that. Not only is it more revenue, but that is pure profit to them. So, for example, we're working with a company now, it's a big SAP consulting firm. They make about 52% of their revenue from SAP, from selling software. It's a recurring revenue, high valuation, pure profit. They didn't invest, there's no ongoing cost to them. So 52% of the revenue and an overwhelming majority of their profit. So stop to think, who do they care more about? Do they care more about SAP, their cash cow, or do they care more about their customer, the end customer that presumably this entire industry was built for? But bad news, spoiler alert, it wasn't built for them, it was built for the vendors. So I'm going to leave you with that, and then we're going to take a quick break. Drop your comments during the break. Drop your comments and thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your feedback. We're going to dive into the book in a lot more detail. We've got a lot more to cover, so stick around. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech agnostic content. With long tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Born of a battle from heaven's hand, and now you know. And here I
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 270. My name is Eric Kimberling. We have new episodes of the show every Wednesday at Transformation Ground Control. And again, this podcast covers everything related to strategy, people, process, and technology. And if you have any guest suggestions that you'd like to see on the show, or if you have questions for me, feel free to DM me, drop them in the chat. Love to hear from you. So now we're going to shift gears and we're going to continue on this theme of the machine, how the tech machine was built, how it favors vendors and consultants more than anyone, and how customers end up with whatever's left, if there's anything left to give. That's the only time that customers succeed, and that is why failure rates are so high in this industry. Most digital transformations fail. In fact, most statistics put the failure rate at somewhere between 55 and 75% of all digital transformations and ERP implementations leading to some sort of failure. And what's interesting about this metric is it is a number that hasn't changed in 30 years. In the 30 years I've been doing this, those failure rates have been remarkably consistent and consistently bad, I would say. And a lot of times the question becomes, well, why is that? Is it luck? Are these projects just destined to fail? And I'd say it's more of a good news, bad news situation. I think the good news is that there are a lot of good lessons, a lot of ways that you can be successful. And we've seen plenty of clients be successful over the years. But the bad news is that the system or the machine of the technology industry is not designed to set you up for success. It's not intentionally designed to lead to failure, but the systemic breakdowns and flaws with the way technology works and the way the technology industry works in particular, they are all designed to lead to failure. So the question becomes then, well, why is that? What is the machine? What is the system? How do we overcome the system? How do we fight back against the machine? And that is actually the premise of my new book that I want to talk about today. It's called Welcome to the Machine. The systemic failures of digital transformation breakdowns. It's got a little watermark on it because this is a advanced speaker copy, but when you buy your copy, you will not have that little weird do not sell text on the book. But it's a book I'm really proud of. It's my third book, but it's the one that I feel like I was trying to get at the entire time with the other two books, but I couldn't quite articulate the way I wanted to. So I have three books. The first book is called The Final Countdown. That book is more about digital strategy and road mapping and how to define a digital strategy that makes sense for you as an organization. The second book was called Welcome to the Jungle. And that book focuses on case studies. So failure case studies, lessons from the case studies, and really getting into the root cause of why some projects fail or why so many projects fail. But then this book, Welcome to the Machine, gets into the systemic breakdown between client, software vendor, and system integrator. And it talks about the three wheels of this machine and how every party is doing something unintentionally that's leading to the end customer failing in their efforts. And so that's a real premise. Is it's broken into three parts. So part one of the book dives into the client side of things. What do organizations do? What are the organizational behaviors and quirks and nuances that internal teams make? And how does that lead them to failure more often than not? And then how do the conflicts of interest that the software vendor has, their economic self-interest conflicts with client success? How is that? Why is that? How can you watch for the warning signs? Those are some of the things that we talk about in the book. And then the third part of the machine is the system integrators or the consultants. So basically the entire ecosystem, the technology ecosystem that supports the software vendors. So you have system integrators, especially the big consultancies. You have industry analysts. You even have some people that hold themselves out as being independent and agnostic, but really they're affiliated with or getting commission from software vendors. So it talks about those three pieces of the machine: client, software vendor, system integrator / consultant / ecosystem. Those three parts of the machine all create a flywheel. If you want to use Jim Collins's analogy of the flywheel, that's what is happening with the machine. Although I will say, Jim Collins, when he talks about the flywheel in his book, Good to Great, he's speaking of it more from a perspective of a positive thing, of a flywheel in terms of scaling a business and growing a business. But in the case of the technology industry, the flywheel is created to benefit the software vendors first and foremost, and clients oftentimes end up getting chewed up and spit out by that machine. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. I'll take any questions you have about the book. I'll share with you some of the premise of the book here today. But love to hear any comments or questions you have as we do this here live and unpack this conversation with you live. In fact, if you don't mind dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today, I'd love to hear from you. We're streaming to all the major platforms today: YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, and X, among others. So thank you for joining wherever you are. But just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from, and then along the way, just drop any chats or any questions you have for me in the chat as well. So I talked about failure rates and sort of the premise of the book: client, technology, and consultant. If you look at this, what's at stake here, what are the quantifiable failures that are caused by this machine? All you have to do is look at some of the recent failures in recent years that I actually talk about a lot of these case studies in this book, but I also talk about them a bit in Welcome to the Jungle as well. But in the context of this book, Welcome to the Machine, I talk about these failures in the context of the systemic breakdown that happened that contributed to each of these failures. So you have companies like Lidl, which is a grocery retailer out of Germany. They spent 500 billion euros on an SAP ERP implementation. It was a massive failure. I think they've since recovered and they've since operationalized the system, but along the way, they spent a lot of money and they had a big failure, and it took them a lot of time to get it back on track. So Lidl is a common one that I've written about and talked about in videos, and you may have heard about it as well. Target Canada lost $7 billion, largely as a result of their ERP implementation, their failed implementation. In fact, they had to pull out of Canada, I believe, and it caused them to shut down some of their operations. So that was a $7 billion hit that Target Canada took as a result of their failed ERP implementation. Nike lost $100 million in their implementation, and that was kind of an ongoing challenge along the way. So those are some of the failures that we talk about in the book. But what I want to do here is talk about each of the three gears of the machine and talk about, how each of those three gears work and how they unknowingly and unwillingly contribute to problems and contribute to the machine being broken there. So, and one other thing I forgot to mention, the book, if you aren't aware, the book is actually, just like my other two books, is named after a rock and roll song. Welcome to the Machine is a song by Pink Floyd, where they talk about, they don't talk about it from the perspective of the technology industry, but they do talk about, in their own way, getting chewed up by the rock and roll machine and being a rising star or rising stars in the music industry. That's sort of the premise of the song and the main character of the book. But I really like the song and the title because it is a very draconian, dystopian sort of vibe. And I'm a big fan of dystopian books in addition to rock and roll. So I felt like a perfect title for this book. And it is something I've struggled with for 30 years. I mean, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the technology industry. I love it on one hand because I love what I do. I love my job. I love consulting to organizations. I love helping them through transformations. I love learning about different cultures and different operational models, different businesses, different people, different countries, all that stuff. I love it. But on the flip side, there's stuff about this industry I really don't like. I don't like how this industry was built, if I'm being candid. I don't like that customers are oftentimes an afterthought. And I think that's probably the biggest problem. If I had to distill it down to one thing, I would say it's technology focused, customers an afterthought, and everyone's self-interest somehow conflicts with that of the end customer, which I think that is the root cause problem of why projects fail, because now you've got advisors and outside experts that are all sort of rigging the system, rigging the game to represent their best self-interest, but those self-interests are too often, more often than not, in conflict with the best interests of the clients. So that's the premise of the book. That's sort of the personal journey. And I know one of the stories I tell in the book is a story about when I first got into consulting and how I was on this project that was at one of the big four consulting firms. It was a software evaluation project for a big Fortune 500 company. And the client was paying somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million, if I remember correctly, of consulting fees to us. That was our project scope and level of effort and cost. And the whole time we knew we were going to recommend SAP. It wasn't even a question of what we were going to recommend. It was just a matter of how are we going to recommend and justify SAP to this client. And client's paying us $1 million, $1.5 million when we already had the answer on day one. They didn't need to pay us $1.5 million to get the answer. We already had it. So we spent months, assessing operations, doing our agnostic assessment of the project. But at the end of the day, it was clearly going to be SAP. I remember actually asking in a meeting too. I was new to the team. I was new to the company. And I asked, what other systems are we going to evaluate? And I got the weirdest look, almost like that was just a crazy question. Like, why would I even ask that question? And I remember thinking there's something wrong here. For the fact that I just asked that question and it was frowned upon, and almost like I didn't get it. That was very concerning. And either I'm really stubborn or I do see something that is extremely broken in the system, or it's probably a bit of both. I am a stubborn person, so I have to admit that. But there is something wrong with the system. And 30 years later, I still have that sense of wonder of why is this? Why does the machine operate the way it does? Why is why is there so many conflicts of interest and that sort of thing? So not a lot has changed in 30 years. Unfortunately, technology's changed. It's really cool. I mean, this is the coolest time for technology, in my opinion. But the fundamental systemic problems in this industry have not changed much at all. So that's a little story I tell in the book. But in the book, I talk about the first gear. Part one of the book gets into the client side of things and what they do that unknowingly contributes. So a lot of times, you look at the behavioral. This is all organizational behavior, by the way. A lot of what this book is, it's not even really about, it is about digital transformation, but it's also, I try to get pretty deep into the organizational behavior and dynamics and the organizational psychology of what happens at these different companies that are failing. And you see that it's not like, it's not like what you might imagine, where there's a bunch of people that are completely incompetent, or a bunch of leaders that are just terrible leaders, or they just know nothing about technology and that's why they fail. It's usually not that. It's usually not that. Sometimes you do get that, but really the real reason why these projects fail goes a lot deeper. It's organizational dysfunction. It's dysfunction internally. It's dysfunction with your vendor. It's dysfunction with your system integrator, and just breakdowns, communication and alignment breakdowns and economic breakdowns, all sorts of things. But it starts with the client. Like, if it wasn't for the customer, I refer, in using the machine analogy, I refer to the client as the fuel. They're the ones that fuel the machine. The technology provides the main core of the machine, and then the system integrators operate the machine and profit from the machine. So that's sort of the analogy that I unpack throughout it. And so if you start with the client, who's the fuel for the machine, a lot of times it begins with they're starting these projects without a clear purpose, without a clear strategic purpose, other than, we have to move to the new version of SAP or Microsoft because those vendors are discontinuing their product, or we need to move to the cloud because everyone's in the cloud, or we need to do AI. That's a common one we're hearing lately, is we need to do an AI project. And, the first question we always ask is why? Why do you want to do an AI project? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What's the purpose? What's the goals and the objectives and the strategy you're trying to uncover or take advantage of. So the wrong reason to start is oftentimes one of the first dysfunctions or breakdowns that happens on the client side. There's often a leadership vacuum. A lot of times the executive sponsor doesn't have the authority to really provide the solid governance that's required, and or the internal team at the executive level is misaligned. They're not on the same page with what it is they want out of the project. So the executive sponsor's role becomes diminished and watered down and less effective, because no matter how good of a project sponsor or project manager you are, it's really hard, if not impossible, to overcome that level of misalignment and dysfunction at the executive level on down through the organization. There's also a tendency for organizations to want to pave the cow paths. They want to put new software on top of old processes, which leads to expensive old processes. So you can spend a lot of time and money on cool new technology, but you've got the same processes, the same weird, broken ways of doing things, or the inefficient ways of doing things. You just have better technology automating bad processes. And so that's a common challenge we see. And a good example of that I talk about in the book is Lidl. They spent 500 million euros on their SAP implementation. It failed, but what they were trying to do is customize SAP to do business they had always done business, or the way they had always done business. So it was inevitable that project was going to fail. And in my opinion, it had nothing to do with SAP as a product necessarily. It had more to do with the internal challenges that this company faced.
Psst. Hey, you like to party?
3 screens just to enter a purchase order?
Man, you look stressed.
I've been in the system for 40 minutes. I still can't figure out where my approval went.
Man, that sucks. But what if I told you there's another way? Check this out.
What's that?
It's a spreadsheet. 47 tabs, color-coded. Runs the entire supply chain.
That can't be right.
Built it myself back in 2014. No training required. No 3-day go live. Just vibes and a bunch of macros.
But the company spent millions on this new ERP system.
I spent 12 hours a week making this bad boy. You know what never has a severity 1 incident? This guy.
Does it do reporting?
Pivot tables, baby. I am the business intelligence.
Oh, shoot. That's my boss. Period end closes due tomorrow, and the numbers still aren't tying out.
I'm telling you, just try it. Just try it this one time. You won't regret it.
So that is a character I developed called Spreadsheet Guy. I was just having fun one day and thought it'd be fun to create a caricature of the type of person that exists in every organization that resists change in some ways. They've got all this tribal knowledge in their heads. They've succeeded through heroics. They've succeeded despite the crappy old systems. The company can't survive without them. Oftentimes, they could be a supporter of change, but more often than not, they're a subtle, passive-aggressive resistor of change because they are the most threatened. But to their credit, they are also the same ones that have held it together for a long time. They are filling a void in organizations, and that organizational dysfunction is a result of not having good processes or good systems or not having good data, whatever the case may be. So even though I make Spreadsheet Guy a semi-likable, semi-unlikable person, he does walk that fine line of he's someone, he or she is someone that you can understand why they're there. And I think most of the time their intentions are good, but more often than not, it leads to some unhealthy organizational dynamics. And getting back to this conversation around the machine that we were talking about before the break, we were talking about how customers, have their own organizational dysfunction, and that can lead to failure. And in particular, we were talking about Lidl right before the break. And Lidl is a good example of how when you put in new software on top of old processes, you end up with expensive old processes. And this example of Spreadsheet Guy that I just talked about here, he is, again, he's filling a void, and he's creating a solution that's in many cases easier, sometimes is better, sometimes is not, than what an ERP system can provide. So that's the organizational dysfunction that exists. And, by the way, drop in the comments if you can relate to Spreadsheet Guy. If you've got a Spreadsheet Guy in your organization, you don't have to name them by name if you don't want to. You can always tag them if you want. Maybe they'll find it funny. They might be offended. Who knows? but you don't have to mention them by name if you don't want. But I'd love to hear your feedback if you know someone, if there is a spreadsheet guy at your organization. And I'll play you another clip from it later. It's an ongoing series. And like I said, I have a lot of fun doing it. I usually do it in hotel rooms when I'm traveling and I've got nothing better to do at night, after a long day. I just want to be a little creative. I'll create I try to do some of these short videos with spreadsheet guy. And there's also a short documentary that I'm doing, a mockumentary, if you will, about him that will be on my YouTube channel soon. But I want to talk a bit about Lidl a minute. I know I talked briefly before the break about Lidl, the German grocery retailer. They spent 500 million euros on an SAP implementation. It failed. And I don't want to say SAP was not at fault at all, but in general, I wouldn't say, from what I know and what I understand in public record information, I wouldn't say that it was primarily SAP's fault. It wasn't that SAP was a bad product, but what Lidl did is they tried to customize the software to match the ways they'd always done business in the past. Instead of asking how could we change the way we operate? How could we, instead of looking at new ways of operating, they were saying, how could we make the system do the old thing? And I think that's why Spreadsheet Guy exists in many organizations and why Spreadsheet Guy is a challenge during a transformation, because Spreadsheet Guy is the, not the cement, but he's the glue. He's the cast of the old way of doing things. He's held it together. And so he's going to want to maintain and preserve that old way of doing things. So it's not always one person. Some organizations have many spreadsheet guys and, or gals, I should say. I need to find a female nemesis or a female version of spreadsheet gal that I could incorporate into the series. So if you know anyone, let me know. That might be kind of a fun sequel or a spinoff to have the two partners in crime, wreaking havoc on organizations throughout the world. But so the key here is to not put new expensive technology on old processes. In the book, Welcome to the Machine, I talk about the equation that's NS plus OP equals EOP. So new software plus old processes equals expensive old processes. And that's what so many organizations do. So, Lidl did obviously eventually recover after spending €500 million to just basically automate the way things were always done, pave the cow paths, whatever you want to call it. They spent €500 million. They eventually recovered. They eventually operationalized the system, but they spent years and hundreds of millions of euros they didn't need to spend. And this isn't anything that's unique. It's one of the most common client-side mistakes we see. The software is oftentimes not the problem. Oftentimes, even the system integrator isn't necessarily the problem, but organizations create this opening for failure by refusing to change. And in some cases, now I've got to be clear about this though, in some cases, it is proper to resist change. And what I mean by that, there are selective strategic areas where you should resist change, or you should at least resist vendor mandated change. So if a vendor is trying to convince you to use a module in their system that just doesn't work, and it's going to water down your competitive advantage, then don't deploy it. Find something else. Keep your old process. Don't try to force fit technology if it's going to make your competitive advantages worse. Now, vendors are the worst, in my opinion, at gaslighting customers into thinking that they're the problem, even if maybe they're not all the time the problem. So you just have to have a strong backbone and a strong stomach and a spine, basically, to be able to stand up to vendors and say, look, I know you want to sell me whatever, but this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And it's important for your team to see that as well. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure we unpacked and dive into a little bit more detail as it relates to the whole Lidl case. There's public information available about a company. I wrote and mentioned them by name. I also anonymized several different client case studies, and I don't mention them by name just for confidentiality purposes, but I talk about, even among our own clients, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the project recoveries we've been exposed to and privy to? What were the problems that led up to that? I talk a lot about expert witness engagements and some of the challenges that those cases had. But again, I don't talk about these companies by name unless there's public information available about them. But so there's a lot of, it's packed with case studies. There's a ton of case studies in this book, and it's a pretty long book too because of that. But I wanted to put as many examples and real world stories as possible in the book, more so than my other two books. There's also something I talk about in the book on the client side, the end customer side, where I talk about the human firewall, different types of resistance, ranging from pure sabotage, which is pretty rare actually, to the more subtle or passive types of resistance, and how organizations tend to focus less time than they should on the human piece of it, even though the human piece of it is oftentimes what leads to the failure. It's usually the resistance to change. It's the inflexibility, the unwillingness or the inability to understand how their processes could be improved. Those sorts of things are why you need change management and why you should spend less time on technology and more time on human dynamics, the change management side of it, et cetera. Same with, we talk about the day two problem, to where you go live with the system, you declare victory because maybe you finish on time or on budget, or you're close to on time and on budget. System walks away, they've declared victory. They say, hey, our job here, our work here is done. The technology works, we're out. We're going to move on to the next project. We already overbilled you anyway, so we're moving on. You're already paying for your cloud subscriptions. They're making their money. They're happy. But more often than not, even when the SI or the vendor thinks the project's been successful, it's not. They leave, and that's when a lot of times clients see and feel the pain. That's why I'll call BS on a lot of case studies. I think half the case studies or references we get from clients are, it's like the vendors, when they give their references, I should say, they don't even fully realize what the impact of their implementation was. But again, what I try to do is not to assign blame here, but just to show that every party in these three buckets, every party, every piece of the machine is working in a way that doesn't benefit end customers, including their own internal behaviors. So that's gear one. That's the client. I'll get into the other two gears here in just a moment, but I want to turn to some audience questions here on the various streams we have going here. Thanks to everyone on TikTok joining. We've got a lot of people listening in here. Yusuf asked, do I know about ERP Next on TikTok? Yes, I do know about ERP Next, open source ERP system. Great product. I don't think it solves the problems that we're talking about here today necessarily, but it is a good option that is worth considering for especially small and mid-market companies. Want to say hello to Mark joining on YouTube from United Kingdom, who's currently in the Philippines. Came in a few minutes late. I don't think you really missed much. You came in right after we started, because we did start a few minutes late. I'm actually partly through a series. This is Christopher on LinkedIn, says, I'm actually partly through a series of essays on Substack paralleling these very concepts from the perspective of data architect and manufacturing engineer who just got tired of it all, decided to build a better mousetrap. Once I'm done reading your books, I'll likely go back and add some editorial quotes from them. So thank you for that, Christopher. Please do. I encourage people to steal my stuff, plagiarize, take my quotes, take my book. I don't care. I like to get the message out to people. So feel free to use it however you want. Lean on LinkedIn says hello from the Netherlands. Thank you for joining. Someone, I think this is the same person I had last week. There was someone from Tampa last week. I could not see who they were. But someone from LinkedIn says, hey, Eric, congrats on book number 3, joining from Tampa, Florida. So I apologize, I don't see your name there. Mark on YouTube says failure rates for his career is like 40%. That's better, but still, I would argue that's not great. And I think, I would love to say my success rate or my failure rate is 0. It's not. We've seen plenty of failures, and a lot of times we have more failed projects happening at any given time because we get hired a lot of times to come fix the failures. And so we probably see more than our share of failures for that reason. Mark also mentions that companies not being mature for change, but then we get back to communication and getting staff aboard for change. So I agree that maturity and communication is both important. Pankaj on LinkedIn says, a great fan of your insights and persona, Eric. I appreciate the kind words here. And then Mark on YouTube also talks about Sabic in Saudi Arabia. It was $50 million for 19 companies into one implementation, and now they merged with Aramco. I was familiar with that, actually. I had heard or read a bit about that massive implementation, one of the bigger ones in the Middle East. Ed on YouTube, thanks for joining from Barcelona. And a bunch of other nice comments here. So I'll keep the comments coming here. I'll get to some of these questions here as we go. So I do want to talk though now about the second gear of the machine. So the second gear of the machine is the technology. We talked about how the client is the first gear, that's the fuel for the machine, but the real engine of the machine is technology. It's the technology vendors, and this is the real money machine. And if you were to look at the center of the machine, this is it. And I think this is the problem. The machine was designed and built to grow and scale the technology industry. And that's fair enough, understandable enough. I don't fault anyone for wanting to make profit. I want to make a profit in our company. I encourage anyone who owns a business to be profitable, and that's their job. So I'm not faulting the capitalist system or the technology industry as a whole, but what I am saying is there is so much money being thrown at technology, and it's getting to the point where now, especially in the 2020s, I would say it's become pretty irrational. It's a big bubble that's brewing here with AI and cloud and all that stuff, and the way investors are rewarding vendors for doing things that are arguably short-sighted. So, for example, the money machine is what drives SAP, for example, to say we are going to sunset ECC by 2030. And it drives SAP and their leadership. And I'm picking on SAP because there's a big behemoth, but this also applies to Microsoft. It applies to Oracle. It applies to any big software vendor, especially the ones that started their journeys or started their products on premise, and now they're trying to move to the cloud because of the valuations and multiples they get on their annual recurring revenue. So I explain the economics in the book, but there's something called annual recurring revenue, ARR. And that, for most software companies, is the most important financial metric they have, because investors want to see that you have high recurring ARR, because if you do, it's high margin revenue, it's predictable, it's fueling growth, it creates less lumpiness in your revenue, and it just creates more predictability. Whereas before, in the old model, when you sold on-premise systems, you'd have one big deal at a time that you sell, and then you might make some money on maintenance longer term, but you have to go sell the next deal to keep that revenue going. Whereas now, every time a vendor closes a deal with a customer on a subscription through the cloud and through their AI tools and whatnot, they are guaranteeing a certain amount of revenue for a long time. And cloud systems are more expensive longer term for customers, but they're more profitable for vendors. So now investors are looking at ARR saying, if you can get your ARR up to X amount, that's our goal, or we're going to reward your stock. You're going to make more money as a company. Your share prices are going to go up. Executives are compensated on ARR. Everyone in the industry is focused on ARR right now. But keep in mind, ARR equates to higher fixed cost and higher switching costs for customers. So again, that economic self-interest right there is a direct conflict, because obviously the more money vendors are making, the more companies are spending. So that in and of itself isn't entirely a problem. It's a bit of a problem, but it becomes a real problem when companies make other bad decisions as a result. They move to the cloud maybe when they shouldn't, or they don't realize how inflexible some of these cloud tools are, or they don't realize all the escalators on the cost side and how much it's going to cost them long term. So things like that are what add up and what would get these companies into trouble or create problems for their customers. There's also, things that the vendor does in addition to just the money machine, the money being thrown at cloud and AI and annual recurring revenue, or ARR. In addition to that, the vendor has other plays in their playbook they've been running for 30 years, and it continues to create problems. It's things like, the sales process mismanaging expectations, overselling capabilities, overselling modules and licenses or subscriptions that you don't need. Just completely going in to maximize your own self-interest as a sales rep, but it ends up harming the customer in many cases. And it's pretty rare that you see the super honest, above board salesperson who says, hey, this project's going to kind of suck. Or, hey, you don't need all the software you're buying from me. You need half of what you're buying. It's very rare you see that. When I do, I actually really gravitate towards those types of sales reps and vendors that are more forthcoming. And there are some out there, but they're almost fighting an uphill battle because, again, the machine doesn't reward that. The machine rewards you to minimize risk, to oversell capabilities, to oversell software, and to get customers locked in, because the minute you have them locked in, you can raise costs, you can do whatever you want in the future. And I think that's where the machine is really going to be exposed here, I'd say, in 10 years. When companies, we haven't yet seen the full cycle of cloud system replacements. So now that everyone's migrating to the cloud, there's going to be a wave, just like there is every 10 to 20 years, where we outgrew the system, or the system doesn't work for us anymore. We need a new one. When that wave of cloud replacement systems happens, it is going to be such a disaster. We're here talking about the technology machine, how it affects customers, and how you can navigate it. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
We can't close the books without the data that only he has, so I have to call him on vacation again. Hey, me again. Sorry to bother you. So yesterday you mentioned the vendor pricing sheet was in your email?
Yes.
I searched final version 7, do not edit 2, but I got 14 results.
Yeah, you want the one from March, I think. Does it have a yellow tab that says Steve's numbers?
They all have a yellow tab that says Steve's numbers.
Weird.
Okay, new issue. The monthly accruals. Karen in accounting says you usually send her a file the last day of the month.
Well, yeah, I send that manually.
Right, so where does that file come from?
I build it.
From what?
A few things.
Can you be more specific?
There's a query I run and then I adjust it.
Adjust it how?
Based on what feels right.
Based on what feels right. Okay, got it.
Miko, I've been doing this for 8 years. I know when the numbers are off. It's like a vibe.
A vibe. Our accruals are based on a vibe.
Hey, real quick, I gotta go. They're doing a conga by the pool and I'm not missing it twice.
But wait, one more thing. The freight surcharge calc. Nobody can figure out the logic.
That's easy. Column F times column J minus the adjustments in the hidden tab.
There's a hidden tab?
Right click and unhide. It's called miss in lowercase. No space. Or maybe one
And
space.
what's in it?
A lot. Freight, landing costs. Don't delete any of it though. Okay, they're starting the conga line. Vamonos. Talk soon.
So, spreadsheet guy, what a character. And this is a follow-up I did from the original spreadsheet guy. It's one of the series here where he goes on vacation. And obviously the point here is when you've got that tribal knowledge, that single point of failure within your organization, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for your business to function, which is why so many organizations want to get off the spreadsheets and reduce that dependency on any one person and move to a central operating model, central system, all that stuff. So just wanted to play you that funny spin-off or that funny sequel, or I think it's funny. I laughed while I was doing it. I had a good time with it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on any feedback you have on the character himself. I'm trying to make it like, just because you're all intimate listeners of this podcast, and these videos tend to get a lot of views. These spreadsheet guy videos seem to do really well on TikTok and Instagram, especially in YouTube Shorts. But I'm trying to find that right balance of making spreadsheet guy likable and relatable, but also a little bit of a pain in the ass, because I feel like that's what most spreadsheet guys and gals are. They're right in the middle there. They have many times good intentions, but in some cases they're difficult to work with, and that's the balance I'm trying to find. So any feedback on how I can further develop this character, I love any feedback you have, because I do not have a Hollywood background or a screenplay background, so I'm new at this, but I am having fun doing it. So we were, before the break though, talking about a bit about the 18 or not the 18-month lie. We're going to come to that here in a minute, in just a few minutes. But we were talking about the people overselling, the vendor community overselling. You don't see a lot of honest salespeople that say, hey, this project's going to kind of suck, or here's a bunch of possible disruptions or things that could go wrong during the implementation, or here's the possibility, the likelihood of you going over budget or experiencing failure. typically those discussions do not happen, even though in many cases they should. So I want to do a quick myth bust here and address what I see a lot of people say. A lot of buyers in the space will say our sales rep is great. They really understand our business. And that's good. Many times, in many cases, they do. But here's the reality. The salesperson's their compensation is built on one thing, and it's closing the deal. It's not your success. It's not your go live. It's not the ROI you get. It's getting the deal. More specifically, getting the software deal. That's where most of the industry is making the most money, is get you locked into a 5-year, maybe a 3-year, maybe longer subscription cloud contract. And everyone's benefiting, make a lot of money off that. Everyone from the vendor to the consultants to the investors, the analyst firms indirectly are getting money because now the vendors are paying them more money because they're more profitable. So now they can pay the analyst firms more money. So when they tell you that the timeline's 18 months, data migration is going to be smooth, and you're going to need all the licenses or all the subscriptions right now for all of your employees, that's where you push back. And you might like your sales rep, but you can still trust but verify. How are they getting paid? What do they get paid to tell you the truth? What do they get paid, and what do they have to gain if they're 100% honest with you about what's going to happen and what to expect in these projects? And I think if you ask yourself that question, you could see why the truth doesn't come out when it needs to. So that's the bad news. The good news is you have an opportunity to get the truth out. You can demand questions. You can dig deeper. You can ask for independent outside advice. You can reach out to me. Our team will help you. There's a lot of different ways you can get the truth, the reality, get the dose of reality. And I know some honest sales reps do exist. I've met them. They're rare. They're not. They are more likely to lose deals, though. I do see some really good sales reps I really like and I respect. They'll lose deals sometimes when you don't think they should. And they might be the more honest, more above board people, but someone else in the room isn't. A competitor might come in to lowball a deal, knowing that it's not at all realistic, or maybe they just don't have the complete understanding of the client. And I see some really good sales reps lose deals because they don't tell the customers what they want to hear. Sometimes they tell them what they need to hear. And I suppose that's the beauty of being in my role at Third Stage Consulting and being tech agnostic and not being tethered to any software vendor or any narrative or any Kool-Aid drinking that most get stuck in, is we can come out and say things that are on the surface might sound shocking. But if you really think about it, you ask yourself, well, is it really that shocking? Is what he's saying that crazy? Or is it just that no one talks about it? And the reason no one talks about it is because there's a lot of money at stake here and we can't talk about it. If we are part of the vendor community, if we're a system integrator, most ERP consultants, most analyst firms, we cannot talk about it because it hurts us financially. So we're not going to do it. So just, keep that myth in mind. You might like your salesperson, you might like your vendor, you might like your system integrator. I'm sure they're good people, but just know that the machine is built and the system is built to benefit them, not you. You don't need all the software you're buying from me. You need half of what you're buying. It's very rare you see that. When I do, I actually really gravitate towards those types of sales reps and vendors that are more forthcoming. And there are some out there, but they're almost fighting an uphill battle because, again, the machine doesn't reward that. The machine rewards you to minimize risk, to oversell capabilities, to oversell software, and to get customers locked in, because the minute you have them locked in, you can raise costs, you can do whatever you want in the future. And I think that's where the machine is really going to be exposed here, I'd say in 10 years, when companies, we haven't yet seen the full cycle of cloud system replacements. So now that everyone's migrating to the cloud, there's going to be a wave, just like there is every 10 to 20 years, where we outgrew the system, or the system doesn't work for us anymore. We need a new one. When that wave of cloud replacement systems happens, it is going to be such a disaster. And I don't say that as a pessimist. I say that as a realist. It is going to be a mess because companies are going to have so much trouble getting out of their contracts, getting out of the vendor lock that's been created right now. And they're going to have trouble getting their data out of the system, migrating to a new system. It's just not going to be fun. And I know software vendors will say, well, you won't have to because you're future-proofed. That's a load of garbage. You're not going to be future-proof. You're just going to you'll have a new system for now, but someday that's going to be outdated, or someday even in the cloud, or even as much as they're investing in innovating in these ERP systems, companies will outgrow the systems. They will change. They will grow. They will evolve in a way that doesn't necessarily align with the software vendor. So the vendor playbook is setting up customers in a pretty tricky situation. Data migration, this whole time I've been in my career, and even more so now, Data has been one of those afterthoughts or things that lead to a bunch of problems and failures. And oftentimes it's a simple clause in a contract that says, we are not going to handle data. You are Mr. or Mrs. Client. We will provide, give us the data, we'll put it in the system, but we're not going to clean it up for you. We're not necessarily going to map it for you. It's going to be up to you to do all that. So again, organizations are told that, an implementation timeline is going to be a certain amount and a budget's going to be a certain amount, but they oftentimes don't have assumptions correct around data migration. And that begins with the vendor. You have to, again, about being forthcoming. Vendors should be saying, hey, your data is a mess. It's going to take you 6 months longer than you think to implement our product, for example. It's going to take you 6 months longer than you think because of data. They don't do that because they want to accelerate revenue. They want to de-emphasize risk. They don't want you to fully understand the risk because they don't want to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in a way that leads you to not make a decision or to not buy their software and services to go with it. There's also the customization paradox. I think a lot of, on one hand, customization is a challenge. It can create a lot of failures and challenges and struggles, but customization, in my opinion, is a necessary evil in some cases. There are times you're going to need to customize. And I think that's a problem with the cloud model right now is it doesn't reward tailored solutions because, again, back to the whole second gear of the machine, which is the center of the machine. The center of the machine is placing a higher premium and a higher value on homogeneous types of implementations. They want, in a perfect world, everyone to implement a vanilla version of their software because they can scale better. The software vendors can scale better and they can support the cloud model a lot more efficiently and profitably if everyone's using the software the same way. That's not in the best interest of customers, especially in the for-profit sector, in the private sector, because companies that are for-profit need to be different. They need to have a competitive advantage. They need to beat their competition. They need to do things differently. They need to create competencies that no one else can replicate. And the cloud software model is favoring these generic vanilla solutions. And so that right there is another problem with the machine that's becoming more apparent now in this cloud environment that we're in now. And then now you add to the machine, the whole trend of AI. And, I've seen data that suggests AI deployments or AI initiatives have even higher failure rates than any other ERP or digital transformation, which I believe actually, because there's so much misunderstanding about AI and so many unrealistic expectations about it and so much lack of focus or lack of purpose for organizations. So I'm not surprised that the failure rates are high, but again, technology is taking center stage. Vendors are getting rewarded for the more they invest in AI, the more they push AI out to customers, the more they charge customers for AI. So again, the economic self-interest run in direct conflict with the end customers. And that's the unfortunate part of this. Now, the good news in all this, by the way, I didn't mention this before. The good news of all this is you might think so far as I'm saying this all out loud, I'm trying to think if I'm listening to this discussion right now, it sounds like a pretty dark, negative book that's just a lot of complaining about what's wrong with the industry. It isn't really, because what I do is I'm not complaining about it. I'm telling how the system is structured. And then part 4 of the book, I actually talk about, okay, that's the reality. I would love to say I'm going to change this in the next couple of years, so don't worry about it. It'll be better soon. I don't know. I don't think that's true. I don't think this is going to get better. I think, the reason I write books like this, the reason I started Third Stage Consulting was to fight things like this, to create a tech agnostic model that only represents clients' best interest. We do not care about software vendors in the least. And I don't mean that, I don't want to sound overly harsh or flippant, but we could care less about the profitability or ARR of a software vendor. We want to see them succeed, of course. We want them to support their customers well. I like a lot of the vendors and a lot of the technologies that are being provided out there. But at the end of the day, we as a company do not care about the economic self-interest of software vendors. In fact, we could probably care less about that. We care about our softwares, or our customers succeeding, our clients succeeding. And so that's why I started the company. I think that's making a difference. I think more independent tech agnostic voices that have emerged in recent years, I think that is helping, but I don't think it's going to change overnight because that money is so powerful. I mean, it actually is pretty insane. We get it, just as a side note, we get offers all the time from software vendors like, hey, if you recommend our product, we'll give you X% of the recurring annual revenue, because there's that much margin built in, and it's that important for them to get that recurring revenue that they're willing to share it with us. And that's the problem. That's another problem that I'll get into in just a moment. The consultants are chasing that money too. And we have resisted that. We will always resist it because that's a core part of our business model and who we are and our culture and our philosophy and just our value system. So that is one thing I can say is we will not chase that money, even though I will be the first to admit we could be a lot bigger and a lot more profitable if we did somehow align with or get money from software vendors. And I'll talk about that here in just a moment. I'm going to come back to that point when I talk about the third part of the machine. So back to the audience here. Mark says, I love working on both sides of the table, the SI or the customer. I love working on both sides of the table, the SI or the customer client. So that is interesting. Mark also says, being copied to me is the ultimate compliment. Interesting question here from Megan on LinkedIn. Based on your book and looking at what's wrong, do you think this industry can be fixed? And what would it take to fix it? Or what would be the first step? So I guess I'll give you the pessimist answer first, and then I'll tell you the more optimistic half glass full perspective. I'd say, no, I don't think the industry can be fixed. But what I do think is that customers can fix their role and their place in the machine, and they can navigate the machine without getting chewed up by it if they do things right. And that is what part 4 of my book talks about is here's the problem. Here's how these 3 different parts of the machine work. Part 4 gets into here's what you as an organization need to do. And the first step is just to be aware of it. I think that's the first thing, because this is the kind of stuff that vendors don't want to talk about. I don't know. I'd love to hear from software vendors. I'm sure there's some listening right now. I'd love to hear from you if you are a software vendor, and I know some vendors, some people are afraid to comment. I get like secret direct messages on LinkedIn and social media all the time from people that say, I can't post this publicly. Please don't share this, but I totally agree with you. It's rigged. It's unethical. It's whatever. We're told to sell a certain way. And I've gotten so many interesting validation stories that I don't share, because I don't want to implicate anyone or throw anyone under the bus that's in the industry, especially if they themselves see the problem and want to be part of the solution. The last thing I want to do is expose them in a way that hurts their career. But what I will say is I think there's more people in this industry that agree with what I'm saying and what I think about this industry, but they can't say it. Because if I work for SAP or if I work for one of the big 4 consultancies or if I work for Oracle or Microsoft, I can't have this conversation with you right now because that hurts my company's, it hurts my company's self-interest. So again, back to the money thing. The money creates a lack of transparency here in the industry, but because I don't make money from vendors, I can say this stuff. But I know a lot of people in the industry agree with me, and not everyone does. And I love hearing from people that don't agree with me. In fact, I like hearing from them just as much as the ones that do agree with me. So I want to say hello to Ken. Good morning, Ken on LinkedIn. Big fan of Welcome to the Jungle. Thank you for that. I would say if you like Welcome to the Jungle, I think you'll like Welcome to the Machine even better. By the way, I'm going to put up a pre-order. I'm so, as good as I think I'm at marketing sometimes. Sometimes I forget the most important things, like give you a link to my book and give you more on that. So let me pull it up and I'll pop that up here in just a moment because I do want to share the link. Because if you do buy it before it's released on May 1st, it is a steal. It's 30% off. If you get the electronic version, it's only $7 if you buy it before May 1st. Because to be candid, just to be transparent in how the book sales machine works, the more pre-sales I get, the higher it'll pop up on Amazon's rankings, and the more it'll get pushed out to more people. So that's my real incentive here, is to get it out to as many people as possible. So I will pop that up here in just a moment for you. So anyway, thank you for that, Ken. I'll give you a link here in just a moment. Third Stage Consulting says, do you know if the incorporation of AI into transformations have increased failure rates? I'd say, yeah, the data shows it. And I think it's validated through our own experience, because what AI is doing is it's creating more opportunity. There's more of a greenfield, wide open possibility for AI, which creates more options and more chaos, more opportunities for misalignment internally, More money is being chased now because of AI. So it's creating a lot of the same, or it's amplifying a lot of the same behaviors that are inherent in any ERP or digital transformation. It's like that on steroids now with AI, because AI, as good as I think the technology is and as game changing as I think it's going to be, I do believe that, by the way. I think AI will absolutely fundamentally tectonically shift this industry. But in the short term, it's amplifying and exposing these cracks that we talk about in the machine. So it's almost bringing out the worst of the machine now. And I actually talk a lot about AI in the book and how AI is affecting and fueling this machine even more and making it worse in a lot of ways. And that's the irony of it all, is the better technology gets and the cooler it gets, it's like the worse the machine gets. So that's the problem. And then Mark has a comment that's a nice follow-up to that, which is, with AI, I want to see value. And that's the challenge that a lot of organizations don't notice. So I'll keep popping up some comments here. I'm going to share with you the link to the book, and I have to, terrible multitasking, by the way. So I'm going to pop up the QR code, top left corner here. You can buy my book. You can read about it if you want. You can buy it for $6.99 US dollars if you do it before May 1st. And then on May 1st, by the way, you'll the paper copy, which this is an example of the paper copy here, and the hard copy, which you can see behind me. The hardcover, paperback cover versions will both be available on May 1st as well, and they'll ship to you anywhere in the world. So you don't have to be in the United States where I am to get the book. In fact, my last book, Welcome to the Jungle, it's the best-selling country was the United States, but number 2 is Germany, which is really interesting. I'll be curious to see if more people in Germany buy this book as well. UK, I think it did really well as well. So Germany, UK, anywhere, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, wherever you are, you can get the book. So be sure to check it out there. So keep the comments coming in. I'll keep the QR code up there while we're doing that. But before I get to more questions here, I want to get to the third part of the machine, because this is an important part. So we talked about the first gear of the machine is the client. Second gear is the technology, the software, the vendors. And then the third gear of the machine is where it all comes together. If the customer is the fuel for the machine, the technology is the engine of the machine, who operates the machine? Well, it's mainly the consultants. It's mainly people like me, but the less unbiased and more affiliated consultants are the ones that are operating this machine. They're the foxes guarding the hen house. So, they oftentimes they're the ones self-assessing their own homework, their own results, their own status reports, when in fact they benefit from cost overruns, time overruns. If you buy too much software, that you think of all the things that benefit a consultant, it's like all those things benefit the consulting firms more than client success. And that's a problem. That's just misaligned incentives, misaligned goals. Software vendors want to sell as much software as possible, as quickly as possible. And consulting firms want to implement as quickly as possible because they want to accelerate the revenue on the services side and get you live on the software as quick as possible, because they're making money on the subscription fees. So there's companies out there. It's amazing to me, some of the economics and the profitability of consulting firms. And this gets back to the point I made earlier, is it's actually harmed me short-term financially to be an independent consulting firm like Third Stage, because I know how much money we could be making as an organization if we took money from software vendors and took a cut of revenue that they generate through our clients. We would make a lot more money, and that would be pure profit. So in other words, if I were to call up SAP or NetSuite or Microsoft and say, hey, I want to be a partner, they would gladly accept, and they would gladly pay me probably, I'm guessing, between 20 and 30% of that annual recurring revenue that they generate from software vendors. And I know a lot of big consulting firms that make a majority of their revenue from that money. So that's the other irony here, is you have to look at, why would consultants be so biased? Well, the reason is because they're making so much money from the vendors. In fact, they're making more money from the vendors that it's hard to justify it's hard to represent or focus too much on customers' interest, because it doesn't benefit them financially in the same way that the vendors do. And that's the whole reason, again, why consulting firms, industry analysts like Gardner, Forrester, et cetera, they're all being paid by software vendors. So they're all, they're creating this ecosystem of believers that overlook reality and overlook risk and overlook negative parts of the industry. And so fox guarding the hen house is a real thing. Bait and switch, bait and switch is a very common thing, especially for larger consulting firms. You get these really high quality people selling the deal, leading the charge, but then you end up offshoring the work to, people with cultural differences, people that don't speak the same language, or young people that don't have a lot of experience. The other thing is the 18-month lie. I talk about that a lot in the book. There's a whole thread throughout the book that talks about the 18-month lie, because it seems like, I don't know why this is, it's been this way for a long time. It seems like most proposals I see gravitate somewhere around 18 months for an average mid-market company. Now, some of our larger clients, it's 3, 4, 5 years is the estimate. And even in those cases, they're underbid. But the whole point of the 18-month lie, whether or not 18 months is applicable to you or not, is the fact that so many sales reps and consultants will use a cookie cutter approach to say 18 months, we can slam in this technology and get it done. But the reality is it always takes longer than that because of some of the organizational issues and dynamics that I talked about: data migration, decision-making, just getting people to change, getting people to test the software from a business user perspective, to complete all the training. All that stuff just takes extra time. And usually the software vendor implementation plans and proposals don't account for those realistic assumptions. They assume that everything is going to be perfect, and that that creates challenges there.
Come on, pick up. Oh, thank God. Listen, month end is tomorrow, and the inventory numbers are off by 6 figures. Nobody can find a reconciliation file.
Yeah, that one lives on my desktop.
Your desktop, your physical desktop in the office that you're not in. Okay. What about the vendor pricing sheet? Procurement says they can't approve anything without it.
That one's in my email. Search final version 7. Do not edit.
Final version 7. Do not. Okay. And the warehouse allocation formula, 3 people have asked me about that today. 3.
That was in my head.
What?
Yeah, I never really wrote that one down. It's more of a vibe.
When are you back?
11 days amigo, but hey, I'm about to party with tequila with my new friends here.
The GL mapping, the bridge file, who else knows?
There he is, the nuisance known as spreadsheet guy, always on vacation, holding the company hostage, but still understandable why he does what he does. So hope you enjoy the humor here, or the attempted humor, I should say. Right before the break, we were talking about this 18-month lie concept and the knowledge hostage. And that's really why I wanted to show you that clip, because oftentimes the software vendors are holding you hostage because they know the software. They know how things were configured. They may or may not have documented how things work, but they know, and they need you to be dependent on them because they profit from it. The more you need to call them back in or to keep them around, the more money they make and the more they win. And that's not in your best advantage, your best interest. And the same goes for some of your internal resources. You've got spreadsheet guys in your organization, spreadsheet gals in your organization. They're also holding you hostage. So this knowledge hostage situation isn't just software vendors and system integrators and consultants that are creating the hostage activity. It's also, in many cases, your own people. And those people, the bad news, good news all at once is that, you need them on your project. You need to get out of their head what they do so that you can automate it, or, build a workflow around it, build a system around it. The bad news is they are not incentivized to do that. Their job is at stake, or their perceived value to the organization is threatened at that point. And that is why they do it. It's usually not because they're bad people and they just want to be as difficult as spreadsheet guy is in the videos. Usually they're incentivized. They have a self-preservation or self-interest they're trying to fulfill. And so a lot of times what happens too is, back to this 18-month lie that I was talking about before the break. If you ever get an ERP proposal, a lot of times it's 18 months. And the reason is because 18 months is a magic number that vendors and system integrators seem to have landed on. Now, a lot of times the 18-month story might be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, depending on, the size of the company and whatnot. But, I do have data, and we've done research in the past that shows that the average implementation timeline actually is 18 months. So it's not totally arbitrary, but it is an average. So an average does not apply to most organizations, but so many vendors use that as a cookie cutter boilerplate and just say, okay, best case scenario, if all these assumptions come true and all these rosy optimistic assumptions come true, then yes, we'll do it in 18 months. But the problem is most of the rosy, overly ambitious assumptions don't come true. Usually organizations can't move as fast as the software vendor and the consultants can because they've got a business to run. They have decisions they have to make. There's usually competing priorities. There's a lot of reasons why the timelines that vendors provide is not realistic and the budgets they provide is not realistic. So usually, some examples of how 18 months quickly turns into years is because you'll have something like data migration and cleanup. It's your job as the customer to clean up that data and migrate it. It might only be one bulleted assumption in a contract somewhere that says you're responsible for it, but that could easily add 3 to 6 months to a project. If you want to do full business testing, user acceptance testing, conference room pilots, that can add another 2 to 3 months. And that is so critical. You have to do that. If you don't do that well, then you might as well not do the project. So, but having said that, they usually do their system testing. They might do some integration testing, they being the vendors, but they rely on you to do the user acceptance, the conference or pilots, and it's up to you to decide if and when you're ready to move on into the next phase of training and go live production. End user training can take an additional 1 to 2 months, but again, usually software vendors and system integrators will say we'll train the trainer, but it's up to you, client, to go train your people, and that's another 1 to 2 months. It easily gets added. Change management oftentimes isn't on plans. That can add months to a project if you do it right. It's going to add a lot more than that if you don't do it right. So either way, you're adding time to the project, whether you do it or not. You're just adding more time and money to the project if you don't do change management and if you don't do it well. Integration to other systems, that adds months because you're almost inevitably going to have some legacy systems or some regulatory types of systems. Like if you're in food and beverage or pharmaceuticals, medical device, aerospace and defense, you're going to have third-party systems you have to integrate to. And it's not an option to not integrate with them. So that's going to add to your timeline. So the one thing I'd say for this section of the book and for the conversation is don't trust the vendor's timeline. You want to build your own plan, your own complete plan that includes some of their inputs, but adds more realistic assumptions and adds some of the missing pieces of the plans that software vendors and integrators typically provide. The knowledge hostage, I talk about that thread as well, where the knowledge transfer between consulting firm and client and customer doesn't happen the way it should, because again, it's not in the best interest of the consulting firms. They actually benefit if you are hopelessly dependent on them and have this sort of codependency on them on solving every problem that you have. And I know there's a fine line for a lot of people that say, hey, but we're not experts. We don't do this for a living. We don't do ERP implementation, so we need the experts. And you do, but the way you manage them and the way you govern them, I would say should be more like the way you would manage a contractor that's building a new factory for you. Or if you're a leader and you're going out to acquire a new company, I guarantee you're going to take a hands-on approach and be actively involved in understanding and learning what you need to learn to be successful in those initiatives. But for some reason, leaders in most organizations tend to shy away from these projects. They tend to just want to relegate responsibility to someone else when they would never do that when they build a new factory or they enter a new market or they acquire a new company. Any sort of big strategic initiative, leaders intuitively are involved and intuitively know they need to be involved. But when it comes to these technology projects, they take a different approach and sort of just hope that the experts will handle everything for them. They want that easy button, which doesn't exist. So the knowledge hostage is something we talk about. And then I also talk a lot about the analyst community. I think the analyst community in some ways is the most damning part of this whole machine because they're the ones that add credibility to it all. They're the ones that say, hey, we've got this magic quadrant that shows that this technology is the best thing since sliced bread, but they don't tell you that, well, guess who commissioned that study? I know customers pay for that research, but vendors are commissioning studies that make them look flattering. I mean, it's a whole strategy that marketing departments at software vendors have. And I've had people argue with me online that no, Gartner does not take money from vendors. It's absolutely not true. Now, I'm not saying every analyst at Gartner is compromised or getting paid off by vendors, but Gartner as a company, Forrester as a company, they make money from software vendors. And you just have to ask yourself, am I getting completely unbiased information if the vendors are involved in paying for these studies and these quadrants and that sort of thing? And so the problem with this part of the machine is that it makes people think that there's third-party validation of what the vendors and the consultants are all saying. So you look at this quadrant and you think, okay, I mean, everyone's saying that this is the best thing ever, or that, you know, my odds of success are super high and there's not much risk in these projects. That is misleading, because now you validated the machine. You validated the economic misalignment, but you made it seem as though it's not there. It's almost like you're gaslighting the customers now. You lied to them. You've convinced them that the vendor narrative is true, when a lot of times the vendor narrative is not true. And the consultants are saying the same thing because they're making money from the vendors. They're saying the same thing because they're getting money from the analysts. So that's the real challenge here, and the thing that is the unfortunate reality. And again, I don't think you're going to change that. There's just too much money and too much momentum behind it right now. But again, like I talk about in the book, there's solutions, there's ways around it. And the first step is to understand the inner workings of this machine. And I will be curious to see over time. I want to conduct a poll to see how many vendors read this book versus, or how many vendors and consultants, you know, people that are part of the second and third years in the machine, how many people read and agree with this book versus end customers. I wrote it more for end customers, but I think vendors and sales reps and consultants, anyone who's interested in this industry, will absolutely benefit from it. And I think you should read it. And I'll be the first to admit I'm completely biased, but you should read this book, because I think it'll be very eye-opening, and it'll help you understand how, just the realities of how this works. Mark thinks that AI is rubbish. He wants more savings, and he wants more life being made easier. He also wants more openness and transparency. I think you'll like this book, Mark. I think you should buy it, because and then he says the reason Germany has so many buyers in my book, because it's the home of SAP, which could be the case. Question here from Ken on LinkedIn says, why don't these customers hire more independent consultants? Why do you not have partnership agreements with the software firms, or who do not have partnership agreements with the software firms? It's a great question. I think companies for a long time didn't really know that independent consulting firms existed. Now I think more of them understand that they do exist. I think it's a very fragmented part of the industry. This part that I'm in, the independent agnostic part of it, is very fragmented. A lot of 1- and 2-man shops out there have proliferated, which I think has helped the overall category and helped create awareness and help create a counter movement against the machine. But the bad news is, I think a lot of times big companies especially will say, well, you know, I feel comfortable with a Big Four consulting firm because I've used them for other things, whether it's my audit or my other, you know, past technology initiatives. And then the Big Four firms are really good at convincing you that you don't need an independent consultant, or that they can somehow be agnostic, which is complete garbage, or rubbish, as Mark would say on YouTube. So I think that's the problem. I mean, if I'm being candid, Big Four firms are better at selling than our firm is. That's part of the problem. Until we as a company get to be a bigger in scale, I think we will continue to struggle with that a bit. You know, and it's not always, by the way, it's not always like us versus Big Four, but Big Four don't like independent consulting firms. They just don't like, they don't like, I'm sure most of them don't like that I'm having this conversation right now and think I'm full of crap or whatever for exposing them. But they don't like independent firms in there, because again, you're holding them accountable, and you've got someone now who breaks the code, or breaks the codependency that the client has on the vendor. Now all of a sudden you've got a third party in Third Stage, or someone like Third Stage, who says, wait, we know just as much, if not more, than the Big Four firms, because we work with so many different systems, and we have that broad tech agnostic view of the world. I would argue we know more about these projects and how to make them successful. And we're not the ones that keep repeating the same mistakes like the Big Four consulting firms are. So they don't want someone like us in there calling BS on them. That hurts their revenue stream. A lot of times what we do is we challenge these teams, these bloated consulting teams, and say, why do you have 50 people on this project? Do you need all 50 people now? Are you sure? Let's really dig into this project plan and understand the workflows and justify it and rationalize. They just want to be left alone, and they want to grade their own homework. They want to be the fox guarding the hen house, and they really don't like it. And they really feel threatened when there's an independent consulting firm. And a lot of leaders are afraid to stand up to Big Four firms, by the way. I don't know why it is. It's the weirdest. If I had to pick one super weird psychological organizational dysfunction, it's this reverence that leaders often have for the Big Four. It's like these Big Four firms are failing you. They're screwing you. you know it, and you still are letting them manage and continue to do all the same BS that they've been doing for decades now. And again, I started my career at the Big Four. I know how it works. And people disagree with me and say that's not how it works. I call BS on it and say I was part of it. I still work with these Big Four firms. I see it all the time. I'm not saying that every person that works for the Big Four is bad, because there's actually a lot of really good people. And that's what makes it even more concerning, is you have a lot of really good people that are getting sucked into the machine and getting taught really bad habits that, it doesn't necessarily match their ethical, system. And I know for me, I never felt right. I never felt like my values were the same or fit in with the Big Four when I was there. I just always, literally the entire time I was there, I just didn't feel like I belonged there. Not because I wasn't smart enough, and not because I was one of the younger people there, but because I knew what we were doing wasn't right. It didn't feel right to me. And I thought it was just a Big Four thing. And then so I left, went to another consulting firm, and it was the same thing. And then I realized, talking to people and just getting more experience, that's how it works. And so I decided that I could keep complaining about it and being unhappy, or I could just do something about it and start a firm that was independent, tech agnostic. And so that's why I am where I am. And that's why I refuse to take money, because the minute I take money for us as a company from software vendors, I know that creates conflicts of interest and problems and gross unethical things, that behaviors that no one can really relate to. So Mark on YouTube says, in 20 years, I have only worked with Accenture that made just one success. And yes, the client can be at fault 80% of the time. I think the clients do a lot of things that lead to their own demise or failure in these projects, but you can't let the vendors and the SIs off the hook either, because they gladly, they sort of feed into it. They actually benefit from this dysfunction. And so they have no real motive to fix it. So that's a definite challenge. Ken on LinkedIn says, do you think the old adage of nobody got fired for hiring IBM, that might trend into the Big Four consulting firms or brand recognition? Absolutely. I think it already happens. I use that line a lot. Like, nobody ever got fired for hiring Accenture. Call me sometime. I will give you a list of CIOs that were fired for hiring Accenture, or Deloitte, or whoever, KPMG. It doesn't matter. I'd say Deloitte and Accenture more. So if I had to pick, I'd say the failure rates are higher for Deloitte and Accenture than KPMG or Capgemini or some of the other larger firms. I don't know if that's just because they have bigger projects and more people and more opportunities to fail, or if there's something that's more broken with those two firms. But it's very common. I'd say if I had to rank them, and this is going to be controversial, some are going to hate this, but I put Deloitte number one, Accenture number two, as far as failure rates that we see. So I do think, but having said that, despite that fact, despite even clients who have had that same Big Four firm fail massively on their projects, they'll hire them again and then think that somehow it's going to be different. And they're not managing them any differently. They're not holding them accountable any differently. They're in some cases, it's a lot of the same team members that were on the failure before. So it baffles me. I don't fully understand it. I think there's a false security, a false sense of security that people get from hiring one of the big firms. But the irony is you're more likely to fail. But having said that, back to the question earlier, if you do hire a Big Four firm, and if you're a big multinational, you may have no real choice but to hire a Big Four firm. You can do that and still have tech agnostic advisors in there. You can have a PMO that's managing them, holding them accountable, and ensuring that the client's best interests are being accommodated. You can also have independent tech advisors helping with change management, the process improvement, the integration to other systems. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen that the Big Four firms typically don't do or don't do well. So you can do both. And we've done that a lot with clients. They don't always like it. I think the bigger like tier two SIs are more likely to be open to a firm like ours, but Accenture and Deloitte are never really happy that we're there. But again, you have to look at this and say, do I care that Accenture or Deloitte is unhappy that I'm bringing in a third party? And by the way, who's the client here? Who's the customer? Who's the one that has to live with the results long term? I mean, that's the question I would ask if I were a leader. But it's weird, like I said, that the reverence for Big Four firms and the fear of Big Four firms is just astonishing to me and unbelievable in some ways, just how it works. I think I tell the story in the book, but I'll tell you here even if I didn't mention it in the book. But we had a client who's a really big company based in the US, but they're a multinational company. They had Deloitte as their SI, and they actually agreed to a clause in their contract, which we absolutely would never recommend agreeing to this. But they had a clause in their contract that said that Deloitte had ultimate decision-making authority for the project. So any project decision that had to be made, they would make the final decision, and they had to have that authority, or else they were going to walk from the project. My response, my knee-jerk reaction was, why didn't you just let them walk from the project then and hire someone else, hire Accenture, hire KPMG? Why did you need them? And it was just a comfort level, a false sense of security. It was a security blanket. I don't know. It's kind of like in some cases, it reminds me of, like, you ever see kids that are like 10 years old and they're still like sucking their thumb or holding a blanket, security blanket or whatever. It's like they can't grow out of the security blankets or the comfort that they look for. That's kind of what it reminds me of. But so I'm not sure why that is, but I think, leaders just need to have more of a backbone. I'd say they need to be more willing to make decisions. That we had one client who's the opposite of this client, where they were a big company too, and they had it wasn't Accenture or Deloitte. It was, I believe it was Capgemini. It was one of the big four, but it wasn't Accenture or Deloitte. So I think it was Capgemini, but they had Capgemini in implementing Oracle, and they had compressed the timeline, had an unrealistic timeline to begin with. But then the client realized it pretty quickly. We helped them realize pretty quickly it wasn't going to get done in that amount of time. So they had to extend the timeline, but they did this early in the project. And what the SI wanted to do is they wanted to keep the staffing level the same, knowing that it was just going to get extended. And so we worked with the client and with the SI to say, no, you're going to throttle back your staffing because you're going at a slower pace now. We're all going at a slower pace, and you don't need to staff up that high. Now, of course, think about it. They don't like that because now you've hurt them. You've hurt their revenue stream. But you have to understand that, but you also can't care that much if you're a customer, because, again, you're the customer. You decide whether or not you agree with what they're advising. Now, a lot of times what big consulting firms and consultants in general are really good at this, they're good at gaslighting customers. They're good at making them think that they're the problem. Like, if you don't just listen to us, then you are resistant to change and you are falling behind and you're being a bad leader. They don't usually say those words, but they make you feel as though you're doing something wrong that's not going to help your business. But at the end of the day, you just have to look inward at yourself and at your team and say, look, we need to do what we need to do. You would never have, back to the factory building analogy, you would never build a factory and have a general contractor just tell you that the budget's going to double. And if you don't do that, then you're the problem. You just wouldn't do it. It doesn't even make sense saying that as an example, but it does make sense. And it happens all the time in the technology space. And I don't know why that is. But until leaders start treating these projects differently, it's going to continue to happen. The machines will persist. Vendors will continue doing this. Consultants will continue doing what they're doing. So it's really up to the customers to change this. If anyone's going to change it, it's going to be the customers. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be software vendors. It's not going to be SIs. It's not going to be industry analysts. The only ones that could possibly change this are the customers themselves. So that's why I hope a lot of end customers read this and get some traction on that front. So a couple more questions here. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for all the great questions here. I know I won't get to them all, but Christopher on LinkedIn says the market is currently in a greater fool modality. Each gear of the machine believes that they can keep things going because the next gear is willing to pay for what the state of the system has cost them. So that's actually really well said. I kind of wish I would have seen that before I published the book. I could have used that. Maybe I'll quote you on social media or quote you on that if you don't mind. That's a great point, because you're right. I mean, it's like if you look around the echo chamber that you're in, if you're part of the machine, you look around the echo chamber, it looks like that's just normal. We've normalized all this stuff. We've normalized failure rates. I mean, no one really cares. I mean, I say it till I'm blue in the face, and I feel like sometimes the industry really doesn't care that the failure rate is 80% plus. If they did, they'd do something differently, do something about it, and stop saying that things are great or stop declaring victory when it wasn't a victory. I can't tell you how many times we had an SI or a vendor say, oh, this was a great, successful project. And we know for a fact that the company couldn't ship product for 6 weeks after go live, and they lost millions of dollars of orders. But in the client or in the vendor and consultant's mind, it was a success. We went live. The software turned on. People logged in. That's not a successful project. But yet they think it is, and they go around continuing to think everything's fine. It's almost like they're sticking their head in the sand. We as an industry are sticking our head in the sand saying everything's fine, even though the data is screaming at us that things are not fine. This is broken. Something is wrong. Someone needs to change it. We as a collective industry need to change it. At the very least, the customers need to change it. And I think until the customers start fighting back, it's not going to change. Because why, to Chris's point here, why would you change? I'm actually being incentivized to keep perpetuating the problem. Everywhere I look, I'm making more money when the client suffers. So why would what realistic reason would I want to change it? Now, I guess the beauty of us, we're creating a counter incentive for us as a company, because we don't make money off the vendors. We're only making money off clients. So everything we do, if anything, we're biased the other extreme. We're biased towards the clients because that's where we make our money. And people are self-motivated people and self-interested people, and they will follow the money no matter who you are, no matter how much you want to focus on ethics or doing the right thing. At some point, you're going to follow the money. And that's, that's the way the system was built. So I think that's a really good point. The machine is running perfectly to do what it was set out to do, which is to make massive amounts of money for software vendors and everyone who works for them in their ecosystem. We're here talking about the technology consulting industry, how it's built, how it's rigged, how it's designed to work against you. But we're also talking about how customers can navigate this and make themselves successful and go in with eyes wide open into the technology machine rather than being consumed by it. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
I don't know. I don't see how I can justify this upgrade to S/4HANA.
Of course you can.
How is that?
Oh, simple. Cloud, AI, user experience, clean core.
But there's no business case. I can't seem to find a positive ROI on this whole thing.
Oh, you're looking at this all wrong.
So how should I be looking at it?
Because there's definitely a business case here.
Okay, what is it?
Well, let's see. Okay, you're going to spend $20 million on your upgrade to S4. According to my math, you are going to save $10 million.
How?
Like I said, cloud, AI, future-proof, getting rid of technical debt, user experience, clean core.
I feel like you just made up that number.
Look, Roger, I think you're overthinking this.
It's Eric. Whatever. Look, the truth is, if you don't upgrade now, we're going to have to cut off support in 2030. I just don't want to see you go through that. Okay, we can just get third-party maintenance and support from Rimini Street or something like that. Ooh, yeah, I wouldn't do that. That sounds risky. We'll be fine. You know, we had this customer that didn't move from ECC to S4HANA, and they really, really regretted it. Okay, well, can I talk to them to get their perspective? Yeah, I can't do that because he's the guy I know. He's dead. He's dead. Why? Because he didn't upgrade to S4HANA? Ooh, those are your words, not mine. Look, all I'm saying is that ECC sucks, and it's just not future-proof. What the hell does future-proof mean? And by the way, you're the one that sold me ECC. Well, yeah, back in 2023. Look around us. Things have changed. It looks exactly the same. Michael, I just don't want to see you get left behind. It's still Eric. Why are you just staring at me? Okay, now you're just being weird. Silence speaks louder than 1,000.
So, fun little video. I made a short skit parody about the sales process with SAP. And to be fair, it's not just SAP. It's often like that, negotiating with any ERP software vendor. And, back to this theme that we're talking about as it relates to the machine. A lot of times people think that the safe choice is safe, when in fact the perceived or the presented safe choice from software vendors is typically the riskiest choice. And, I was talking before the break about the security blanket analogy and how, it just kind of popped in my head. I'm not sure why I came up with this analogy on the fly as we were talking before the break, but it just popped in my head. It reminds me of older kids that like to get to be 8 or 10 years old and they're still sucking their thumb, or they're still walking around with their blankie or their stuffed animal or whatever. And they just can't quite grow out of that security blanket feel. And that is a lot like how companies are towards some of the big incumbents in the technology space. They think that hiring SAP or hiring Deloitte, hiring Accenture, hiring Microsoft, Oracle, whoever, insert big well-known name here that's been around for a long time. They think that it's the safer option. And there was a phrase decades ago that said, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. I apply that today to insert any big name. No one ever got fired for hiring SAP, Accenture, Deloitte, et cetera. Although insert any company name and I will give you a list of CIOs and executives and leaders that were fired largely because of the actions and the results of those same big names. So I don't know if they have higher failure rates than their smaller counterparts, but I would say they're easier to manage. They have less of a conflict of interest, and the smaller, and when I say smaller, I don't mean go find a tiny SI or a no-name software vendor. I mean, look for maybe another tier lower where you have a little more leverage and a little more importance to the customer or to the vendor. But a lot of times those smaller software vendors and system integrators are easier to manage, and you're going to have better results for that reason alone. The machine, as we talk about it here today and in my book, the machine works best for the big incumbents. So all the big names like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, Deloitte, Accenture, KPMG, PwC, IBM. I could go on and on. There's a few dozen of them I'd insert into that category, but those are the main culprits. But today, a lot of people think no one ever got fired for hiring Deloitte. No one ever got fired for hiring Accenture or SAP or Oracle. Again, I'll tell you a lot of people that that did get fired, even though they thought that was the safe bet, even though they thought they were hiring a blue chip name. Now, part of me thinks and wonders, no one's ever said these words to me. And it's a hypothesis I have more recently, just in the last year or two, I've been thinking about this. And that is, I wonder if there's a mindset or a psychology with leaders that know that the odds of failure are very high. And they know that if they're just looking statistically at a project, that they are likely to fail. Now, most of them don't go in planning to be one of the 80% to fail, but they might be acknowledging deep down that this is probably going to fail. If and when it does, I want to at least be able to say as a COIA that I hired the best. I hired the best known name. I hired the brand name that everyone heard of. No one's going to be shocked or alarmed that I hired Accenture, Deloitte, or SAP because so many other big companies or my peers or whoever are deploying those same systems. So there is part of me that wonders if there's a sort of psychology like that. I'm not sure that that's true, but if you have some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Even if you don't want to speak on behalf of yourself, if you want to speak on behalf of a friend or someone you know who you think might have that in their minds, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But the big four firms and the big ERP vendors do have high failure rates. And I'll go on record saying that in my experience, including having worked at one of the big four and continuing to work with helping clients manage these big four consultancies, they have failure rates that, even if they're not higher than other firms, they are definitely bigger. I mean, you have bigger, more massive failures in terms of cost overruns and operational disruptions and things like that. And it's not because the people are bad. These companies actually have very smart people. I mean, you look at Deloitte and Accenture, especially Capgemini. I don't know what it is about Capgemini, but they seem to have really smart people there. KPMG, when I was at PwC, everyone there was really smart. It was almost intimidating how smart they were. So I know that they're smart people. A lot of them are really good people, but because the model is built for the company's profit, not the customer success, it's almost impossible for someone to not succeed, but to not fall prey to this or not unwillingly become part of the machine. I know when I was there in the big four, I never felt quite right. I think I was saying that before the break, that it never felt right that I was profiting from, overbilling a client or whatever the case may be. So I think that leaders just need to recognize that when they think they're picking the safe firm, what they're really doing is picking the firm that's most likely to fail and most likely to make you pay for the failure. Because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to pay for it. They're not. You might sue them, maybe even get some money out of them if you do sue them. But this is a numbers game to them. And an occasional lawsuit here and there isn't enough for them to stop the machine or to stop the model that has worked for them for decades in many cases. So real safety isn't always the big logo. Real safety is, the real way you get that safety net or that feeling of no one ever got fired for doing whatever. I would say if I were to insert something different than hiring a big name blue chip partner, I would say the real safety comes from independent oversight, from having realistic and honest timelines, and a partner whose incentives are aligned with yours. And I always tell our clients and our potential clients this here at Third Stage is that, look, you have to look at how we get paid, because at the end of the day, I'm not, I know I'm talking a lot about money in this book and this conversation, but at the end of the day, we're all rational human beings. We're all self-interested. We're going to go where the money is. So in our case, guess where the money comes from? It's coming from our clients. So we only care about our clients succeeding. That's all we care about. We don't care about the software vendors. And that's why software vendors sometimes are threatened by us and they don't like us, because we're not on their side. We're not drinking the Kool-Aid. Now, when I say we're not on their side, we're not coming in and being combative and aggressive and just a pain in the ass to work with. That is not our intent. It's not our style. But when the money's not flowing in our direction from the vendors or the system integrators, they don't trust us. And there's a reason for that. It's very clear. It's because we're not getting paid in the same way they are. And I think if you're a client or a potential client, you should look at that and say, if my consulting partner is only getting paid by me, then their only loyalty is to me. They don't have this conflict of interest, this conflicting loyalty between different parties. So this is a contrarian view. A lot of you may not agree with it, but I'd say the safe choice, the perceived safe choice, is typically the riskiest. Be sure to check our website, Transformation Ground Control, for more episodes. If you want to see all the past episodes that you've missed, you can also subscribe to it wherever you listen or watch. So be sure to check that out. Go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. We drop new episodes every Wednesday. It streams to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, X, and sometimes TikTok when it works. And be sure to check out my other content on LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok and Instagram as well. So hope you enjoyed today's episode. Love to hear your comments and feedback below. We'll take some of the questions, comments you have, and talk about them next week and in upcoming episodes. So be sure to drop your thoughts and comments below. So hope you have a great week. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage and how we can help you with your transformation project, be sure to reach out to us. Be sure to check out my new book, May 1st, Amazon, Welcome to the Machine. You can order it now for a discount. Physically, it'll ship on May 1st anywhere in the world. So if you want a paperback like this version or the hard cover version that you can see behind my shoulder, you can also get that on Amazon beginning April 1st. But be sure to pre-order if you don't mind. That helps me with the Amazon sales rankings when the book is released and it gets pushed out to more people. More people will benefit from it. So hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.